and welcome to the final part of our prerequisite program. And today we're going to be talking about the how of the change program. If you haven't seen the other episodes of this prerequisites, we definitely recommend that you look at the previous ones, because really the whole process of the transformation starts with the why and goes forwards as a mindset change, and then the how, the actual mechanical part, the things that you can see and do, really come out of that mindset change. So definitely recommend you look at the other ones first, because it will prepare you and your organization much better to hear what Wolfgang and I have got to say today. So welcome, Wolfgang. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Simon.
Fantastic. So where should we start with today? So we've got the this is the mechanical how part, what people actually do. So
Right.
It's normally I find that most sort of training courses, or certainly when I look at things on the web, start with the how, but
Right.
we've started it the other way around.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
However, I think it's nice to build on, particularly, for example, what we talked about last time, which was about the who, right? So who is involved in this? And that is really what is necessary to really build an ecosystem for establishing a broad engagement, right? For such a transformation, for such an effort. It wouldn't help much if only, let's say, the leadership team or only, a couple of Scrum teams were engaging in this. This is such a profound change that we're talking about. So we really need a broad coalition, a broad, ecosystem throughout the organization and possibly even beyond to make this successful.
Yeah, so this is, like you say, we covered this in the who, and this is really, you can't, unless you've got the who right, then you can't really get the how right, because the approach that we take is very much an inclusive approach, that we need to sense make in a complex environment. And when things are so complex and fast moving and involve so many different parties, we want to be able to get the sense making, or the information about the current state, about where we are now. Now, as leaders, we think we've got a good handle on what's going on in our organization, and to a largely superficial degree, we do. However, the ins and outs and all the complexity of everybody's day jobs, of course, we could never expect to understand the entire complexity of the entire organization, and neither would we want to. If you imagine a tree with its tree trunk going up into branches and then into tiny little leaves, thousands of different leaves all over the organization, from a leadership perspective, looking from the trunk view out into the leaves, we can't expect to understand every bit of that complexity. But if we are going to move forwards with the change program, we need to be able to make sure all of that complexity is included, all the detail, the different interactions between all those parts is included as well. So from a how perspective, we're going to need to have an approach which has that level of detail, but is also not overwhelming or impossible for leadership to manage and cope with, which basically means we need to include all of those different people and the interactions between them as part of that change program. And so the how needs to make sure that it's very inclusive.
Right. No, it's totally important. If I may also inject into this a key thought to depart from, let's say, maybe traditional change management programs, right? Where somebody cooks up, this is what we need to do. And then it's almost like a marketing pitch, right? Thou shalt do this. We've thought through this. This is good for you, right? And we're taking a very different approach here, where we want, as you mentioned, help that we all do sense making together. We all understand, we look at the same thing in a similar, if not the same way, that there is a certain disadvantage, there's a certain maybe even defect, there's a certain pain point, right, that we're currently experiencing and that we all agree on needs to change and needs to evolve into something better, right? So the point of departure of where we start with this transformation, it's very important that we're seeing eye to eye, and ultimately, hopefully we have as many as possible of this ecosystem, of this coalition, seeing really the same, the need for changing, thus will reduce, if not erase, the need of a change management program later altogether, because we're all in this together. We are co-creating. That's the ultimate goal. We're co-creating this path where we want to go to.
Yeah. And I like this sort of nothing is done to anyone.
That's it.
Approach. It's like because it's inclusive, we are co-creating the way forwards. And there's this. So typically, like you say, in a change program, there's this core central group of people, and that may be leadership, maybe a management team, it may be the agile coaches or enterprise coaches. And typically, the expert mindset that most of us sort of grow into from school, and we're learning that we as individuals have to be expert in our fields, then leaks over into this idea of change, where if you extend the expert mindset, then we need a bunch of experts to define the change for others. And it's really counterintuitive in the way that we've been brought up, that that's actually not the best approach. And we have to sort of let go of this expert mindset, because things, once you get to a certain complexity, the expert mindset is no longer good enough. It has to be the expert, the collaborative systemic experts across the whole system with all of the different expertise combined together in a way of systems thinking across that ecosystem. And so as we talk about the how, these are the kind of heuristics that we need to bear in mind. So we're not doing things to anyone. It's a co-creation, that the system is too complex for any one group of experts to understand and manipulate. Mm-hmm. So what we can be experts in, though, is creating the right facilitation and coaching techniques, the right sense-making techniques for the organization to come together without too much disruption as part of the day-to-day, to enable the business to keep functioning but changing at the same time. And so when we start to look now at the how, we need to make sure we include all of these elements. Otherwise, we're going to fall into the sort of pitfalls that we all hear about on that we hear coaches moaning about on LinkedIn, for example. Lots of people complaining about leaders not listening, or people not stepping up, or sort of no entrepreneurial spirit in the organization, or massive resistance to change. All of these kind of things stem from this approach that many people take of this small expert-led group trying to force change or invite change even onto others. We need to be much more inclusive.
Right. I mean, and that is not to say that coaches wouldn't have a role to help others see things better, right? So just the point that you were making, system thinking, right? I still realize there's still a lot of opportunity to improve the common understanding of treating organizations like a system, right? And so reflect a little bit about this, maybe partially even help educate people, obtain the insights that others have found, right? Studies that have been carried out, etc. There's still, I think, a very pivotal role that a coach can have to help others see this. But the key point is that it's not like, oh, I just pulled one of the books out of the shelf, right? Here's my playbook, and now you go and just follow what's written there. That's not the idea anymore, right?
And this is really where the sort of coaching mindset replaces the or adds on to the expert mindset, right? Because the pivotal role of a coach is to create the space for other people to work out and figure out their own problems. And if we add into that sort of facilitation technique, sense-making techniques, and then, of course, there is a part to play in terms of expertise of the agile coach, of system design and organizational structure and incremental delivery and things like that. So we've got these people who are experts in organizational change, but we also need this creating space to help other people design and create their own organizations based on the incredible complexity and detailed expertise knowledge that they hold. So you've got this sort of dual role of these sort of coaches or senior leaders who have this deep knowledge of how organizations work, but at the same time, you cannot use that expertise directly and tell everybody else how everybody else should work. And that's where you get this challenge, and why the coaching approach, the facilitation approach, is so much better. So we need to find a way, which is what we'll talk about now in the how, of having all of this knowledge about how the organization should work in the ideal world, and the actual organization of what is really going on, and how to all of the people in the organization are going to meet the challenges of whatever business challenge that the organization faces.
Right, right. Yeah, and as you mentioned before as well, and I said, I think as well, it's really having clarity of what these challenges are, what's behind them, right? And then working on how we can actually change that. And there again, it's pretty obvious to anybody in the agile and lean thinking world. You most likely won't do this with just, okay, I do one strike, right? We have here a problem and here's the cure, and now we just follow this. No, I mean, we're talking about iterative design of products, of sense making, whatnot. The same holds true for changing the way we're working, for transforming an organization. So designing experiments is going to be pivotal, right? So if you find something is not working the way, it's not producing the outcome that you're expecting, right, then think through what could be an alternative route to do this. And maybe before you embark on setting the whole organization, particularly if it's a large organization, onto this, right, rather think of what is a realistic, still important enough, right, scope for an experiment that we can learn as an organization together how it may be working better. It's very often that with your first iteration of an experiment, something is still not quite the way you want it, right? Then you course correct that again and again and again until you feel, now we found it. Then you look for how can others maybe you have different business units, whatnot, right? How can others benefit from what we found? And yet again, be careful not to just take a cookie cutter approach there and say, because it worked in one unit, now I have to exactly copy and paste that to others. Most likely that's not going to work either, right? So you'll always have to make this approach of sense making. What's the problem we're trying to solve, or what's the unwanted, undesired situation we have? How do we overcome that, right? And go back, think through what are alternative approaches, figure out how would you even know you're making progress, right? So what are potentially meaningful metrics that will guide you whether or not you're working towards improvement, right? But this whole sense of I'm working within a system to produce some products, and at the same time I have to work on the system to improve how I can produce these results, right? This is not a one-time, oh, now we improve it and now we can fix it and everything is perfect for the next few years. No, winning organizations will always look at constantly. They make it part of their DNA to always retrospect, how do we do this particular iteration, this particular period, and what can we do better? Even though we might be performing on a very, very high level, what can we yet do better, right? So always feel like you're competing with your own past.
Yeah, and what strikes me is that the approach that you outline here, Wolfgang, is fantastic, and it's the way that we build products in this agile way is the same way in which we or change organizations. So it's building agility in an agile way. Yes. And one of the challenges which we have seen is that to enable that, the leaders need to have the senior managers or whoever it is who is responsible for the organization or the part of the organization which is changing, need to have a certain mindset. They need to have a certain understanding of complexity and sense making to enable these changes to actually work within the organization. And if there isn't that unity within the leadership team on not only what the why is, so see back to the video on why about how to figure out what the actual changes we're doing, what the purpose of it is, there has to be alignment around that. And then there has to be a deep inner work that has to happen within the leadership team such that they understand complexity and understand people and how the way people change enough so that those things combined can create the right space for all of the things you talk about, for the experimentation, for other people to get on board with enabling others, mentoring others, coaching others, to bring those people up in terms of their understanding and knowledge of complexity. So you've got this kind of ripple effect from the leadership downwards of the way that people treat the relationships, treat work, treat each other. And if that isn't done at the outset, at the beginning, then what happens is that leaders try to, if you're lucky, they try to implement things like experimentation. And then when things, and experimentation is really around creating a hypothesis and then proving whether it is true or false. If the hypothesis ends up being false, then that's considered a failure. And if that's a failure, then people aren't going to want to run experiments unless the hypothesis is absolutely true, in which case we get one shot, and that's not an experiment.
Nope.
That's going back to project work of we're telling everyone what to do, and we've got to make sure that it's right and we succeed, which means that the mindset wasn't there. And even though we're calling them experiments, we're back to exactly where we were before. And so in terms of how to get this working, we must start with the leadership team. The leadership team has to align on the why, and then they have to embrace complexity, upskill themselves so that they themselves can deal with uncertainty.
Yes.
And then once that training and that work is done and they themselves operate in that way, we can then start to include other people to ask their opinions and their way in sense making and spreading out in the organization in that way.
Yeah. No, totally true. And I can only say from my own experience, this, what you just mentioned, is in theory, or when you reason over it, it's pretty obvious. It's common sense, right? How it should be, but it can be awfully hard. So when you are in a system where it still is considered a failure, right? If something doesn't work out as we had planned it to be, if we had even announced to other parts of the organization or even to customers, and now it's a loss of face if we didn't deliver, right? In those situations, very quickly, a bad message, a message of a software defect or a message of a missed deadline or something, right, becomes a real problem. So people start hiding it, right? And that only changes once, I felt for me, it only changed once I changed my attitude towards a defect message, right? So I can still have negative feelings about a defect that maybe someone from my team tells me about that wasn't really expected. But I gotta take a deep breath, take it for what it's worth, and then shift my mind towards, now this is an opportunity for learning. This is a signal we can do better. And so I rather welcome this. Not that I'm happy about a bug, right? But I'm happy, I'm welcoming, I'm putting myself in a different space where I see this as an opportunity for us as an organization to grow. The flip side of that is, I really need to be serious about this. Doing the same mistake over and over again will certainly not help, even with a positive attitude towards a defect message, right? So you got to double down also on when you recognize something is wrong. Now, what do we do to avoid this from happening again? And then we're back to working on the system, right? And that's really I felt, at least that was my journey as a leader, right? To shift my mindset. Once I made that shift, I think I could be so much more helpful to my team.
And there's quite a few things in there. The depth of what you've just talked about is quite profound, really. At one point you mentioned, I take a deep breath and then I look first. And that deep breath, even that take a deep breath, there's a deep neurological thing that goes on with all of us. All human beings are wired in the same way. And when we're activated by stress, certain parts of our brain become unavailable to us.
Yes.
And those are the thinking parts, the logical parts, the bits that take things in perspective. And when we have that sort of stress response, a physiological stress response, which is triggered by things at work, we enter into a sort of fight or flight mode, and things become very, very binary. You're either with us or you're against us. This is the right way, or sayings like everyone thinks like this, or this must be done. We have to do this. All these things are signs of a person operating from a stress response. And when we have that stress response, we're not looking at things in a balanced way, and we're certainly not operating from an inclusive perspective. And so even things like self-development in the leadership team, of understanding how to manage their own stress and create not stress-free, but certainly a lot less stress, so that people are able to operate from a perspective of the thinking brain rather than the fighting or flighting brain, so that we can create an organization which is able to think its way out of its problems rather than react and panic its way out of problems. And these are key self-development elements which every leadership team has to have. And it's no longer good enough to say, oh, these are sort of hippie, woo-woo kind of like mindfulness, kind of all these kind of like meditation kind of belongs somewhere else out of work. These are key self-development tools which are required for us to maintain the right thinking space to enable us to think our way on collective mass out of the challenges which are faced today.
Yes, yes. However, this is part of, you have to a certain extent, let go, right? You're letting go of at least perceived control that you would have. Now you're trusting your team. You need to be trusting your team that given certain constraints, they will do better, right? That is awfully hard. I can say that from my own experience, from environments I've worked in, and certainly in the environment, right? If really the top leadership operates in a different world, it gets next to impossible, right? To really act and behave differently. So it's paramount in this whole change that actually the C-level is not just fully bought in, but it's not just supporting, but it's actually actively demonstrating this change themselves. Otherwise, I fear it won't happen.
So in a summary of the approach, we start with the why, understand what the purpose of the change is, what actual real business things does the organization need to adapt to. Right. We need to understand who is involved in all of the change, who actually needs to change their work. We need to understand the what in terms of what's the theory behind change. We need to understand a bit of that. And then all of that needs to go into the how. And the how is that we start with why. We work with leadership to make sure that leadership are aligned on the why. We need to upgrade the internal brain software, if you like, the human operating system, in terms of being able to manage from a place of less stress, being able to manage from a place of inclusion of others. And then we need to work out who needs to be involved and invite them in. We need to use a coaching and facilitative technique across large numbers of people so that those people can bring their expertise and their incredible detailed knowledge of the organization to bear to the problem, so that we're not trying to fix one thing and creating 10 other problems. We do it collectively and sense make together. Through that sense making, we create experiments. And here's an opportunity for those experts of organizational change to help guide those experiments so they make sense. So the organization can experiment and continually reflect on the hypothesis of the experiments to continually learn about the changing environment they find themselves in, and really bring to bear that complexity of the organization so that we think our way out of our challenges rather than react and panic. And all of those processes along that chain really are around the coaching, facilitation, bringing in the different meetings that are required to sense make across that number of people, and to leverage those expertise. So we've got meetings, self-development, people need to be trained in a new way of working, and we need to adapt this sort of mindset, which is about learning and long-term success rather than short-term panicking. Which often destroys any type of change effort.
Right. And perfect summary. And just the little thing to re-emphasize again, there will be a lot of things going wrong there will be bad decisions, there will be bad experiment designs. You have to expect that. You have to allow for that, as long as you recognize something is going wrong early through regular inspection and course correct, right? It is about the speed of learning, not as an individual only, that too, but as an organization, right? How do you learn faster than, for example, your competitors, how to get it right? That's the name of the game. That's the gold standard.
And if we think about that kind of lowering the risk and when things go wrong, quickly course correcting, what we're talking about really is about reducing cost as well, reducing cost and risk. Now, people may be thinking, well, how much is all this going to cost? You know, so all these different people having all these different meetings and things. Well, when we look at this, we do need to allocate. The cost really is that we have this normal, in a traditional sort of way of change, you've got this centralized group who are working on the system. And you may still have that group, but we're also looking that people also throughout the organization, for a very small part, also need to work on the system as well as in the system. And when we talk about the system, we talk about the organization. We use the word system because we're thinking about not only the people in it, but the interactions and the connections between everybody. And it's really a reflection on those as well as the actual work we're doing and how can we improve that. So the typical agile meeting would be a retrospective to look back on what's gone on, but we also need to sense make about what's actually going on now and derive experiments going forwards that include everybody. And that's the cost. It's the time that people need to spend on the sense making. And the frequency of that, of course, will depend on how quickly and how changeable the context is, or the industry that you're in, and how quickly people adapt and are fluent enough to sense make quickly in your environment. So some companies may need to spend a significant portion to iterate very quickly in a very changing world, whereas other companies have slower moving industries and will not need to spend as much to adapt. So it really depends on your context and what the organization is.
Right, right. However, agreed. And the only kind of word of caution, particularly for those where it's changing a lot, right? Digital software industries tend to change quite a bit and quite fast. Always keep an eye on this. It's not just, how many, in an analogy, how many trees can I cut? And can I do this faster? Right? It's also every now and then you have to sit back and actually sharpen the saw, right? So that you can actually hit and cut the trees faster than you could before, or at least maintain the speed, right? And that is what we're talking about. The sharpening the saw is the working on the system, right? Mm-hmm. So that cutting the trees, working within the system, can happen as best and as fast as possible.
And using that analogy as well, there's also another layer as well to also every now and again reflect on, should I be cutting the trees? Is there another approach as well that I can be doing? A prime example of that is, for example, in the automotive industry, lean, for example, many people have heard of. I should imagine by the time you're listening to this, you'll be well versed in things like the lean systems that came out of Japan. And when we think about looking at that system, how can we more efficiently deliver cars to the market? And if we keep on delivering more and more cars to the market, then that's fantastic because we've got a really good lean system. And then you go wider and look at the damage to the environment around the planetary environment of producing more and more cars. And then really maybe there needs to be a think, of which there has been, well, perhaps we go to electric cars. It's a different thing. And and using the automotive industry as well. I remember there was that very famous quote with Henry Ford. If you ask, I think you might have mentioned this in a previous call, if you ask the customers what they want, they'd have said faster horses and not a car. And so really we need to look at the whole thing systemically. Are we producing the right things? Are we doing the right stuff? And then when we know that, we can look at different strategies to see how they get there. And then once we choose the right strategies, we can look at efficiency of how to deliver it much quicker. And so there's layers of change and iterative planning throughout the organization.
Right. And the point I think you were making there, it's not just the efficiency, but it's also about the effectiveness, right? This is, are we even cutting the right trees? Are we even building the right means of transport, right, for the time. And then the last is actually the sustainability, right? So can we do this? One, in terms of, is there going to be a market for this going forward? But also, are we doing this in a speed and in a way that is sustainable so that we can keep doing this? I mean, it's no good if I get the initial product version out and then everybody is just flat out exhausted and would be leaving, right?
Yeah.
That wouldn't help. So it's the balance between those, and that's again where the reflection, the regular reflection, the retrospectives of how we are doing, what can we do better, is so paramount. And missing to devote time and energy and capacity, actually quality time, right, to this, thinking about it, will create a huge risk of running, of course.
Yeah, so we've kind of gone through all of the different points. If you do want to go deeper into this, so Wolfgang and I at the beginning of this series created a set of checklists which are really about conversations to have at the beginning of any transformation. And we want to also emphasize the point that even though we've called it prerequisites, you can look at this checklist, you can review how things are going at any point throughout a change at any point, because there is no kind of life cycle, it's continual change. But at any point you can visit these, have these conversations to go deeper into the change and hopefully make it a lot more effective. And you can download those checklists, and we'll put the link up as part of the video. So you can download those checklists, have a look through, and of course Wolfgang and I would be more than happy to assist. So do feel to get in touch if you would like our help with the change going on in your organization.
Exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. So thank you for this time, Wolfgang. It's been a pleasure as always. And
thank you, Simon. It was a pleasure. It was mine.
Brilliant. Excellent. And we hope that anyone watching this has found this useful. And we hope to see you soon at some event or other meetup or something going on. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Okay.